In walks Dan Huff. Her producer's going to come by. He didn't even say who that was. I was excited to meet him, first of all, because, I mean, it's Dan Huff. I mean, we've all heard him, and he's amazing, and he's also a big producer, and you want to get in the room with these people and just play. It's funny how he puts that.
Today's episode is sponsored by Gator Cases. Guitarists, like any other musician, value the advantages of proper protection for their gear. Guitars, amps, effects, and accessories all need safe transport and storage. Luckily, Gator's got you covered. When I interviewed Dan Huff, he shouted you out about a session where I think it was maybe the first session you ever did with him. And I think he said it was a Beatles session. And I think he said he felt bad that on the session you weren't able to show your breadth of skills as a guitar player. And then he said that you would probably be able to tell the story better. Do you remember this session or what he was talking about?
Of course. Well, I had no idea Dan was going to be there. It wasn't a Dan Huff session.
Yeah.
So he was producing this artist at the time. And this, I was playing, it was a Beatles compilation record that this guy was producing, who I also had never worked for. And the song in the morning or whatever was Blackbird, which we all know.
But just impossible to play, isn't it?
Well, here's the thing. I was on electric. They wanted to reimagine all these songs. But Blackbird is so iconic with just an acoustic guitar and a vocal, you know. And so he said, oh, yes, this artist is going to sing it, and her producer's going to come by and probably play the acoustic part. And I don't even remember who was playing acoustic on the session, but in walks Dan Huff. Her producer's going to come by. He didn't even say who that was, and so I was excited to meet him, first of all, because, I mean, it's Dan Huff. I mean, we've all heard him, and he's amazing, and he's also a big producer, and you want to get in the room with these people and just play. I mean, my attitude was it's funny how he puts that, because I wasn't necessarily trying to show him like what I can do. I mean, I think the best thing to do is always just play the session. Whatever. If you play one note, play the hell out of it. You know, do what it needs, right? But yeah, it was kind of like this weird scenario where all I could do is just kind of like these volume swelly things that were ambiguous that, you know, you just and he came over to me at one point during the session. He goes, I think he alluded to, like, I've heard you doing some things. I know you're playing on some records, because at the time Lady A stuff was pretty big, and that was kind of the first stuff that I got going with. And he was like, yeah, man, I know that what you're doing right now is below your pay grade, but you know, it sounds great, you know.
Yeah.
He was encouraging.
And did that mean something to you that he said that?
Of course, because I figured he probably knew that situation. He'd been in that situation probably himself, you know. Yeah, I mean, of course I wanted to make an impression, but the most important impression was that I could make at that time wasn't necessarily like something that I was going to play that was going to wow him. It was more like professionality. You know, just come in here and be respectful and be the best version of what needs to happen here. And he'll see that because he's smart and he's been there.
When you're on a session with Dan Huff, is he in any kind of position to show you anything about being a session guitar player? Or is he mostly in the producer role? Or like, what do you take away from working with Dan Huff as a guitar player?
Well, I learned something every time I'm in the room with him because he's because of how good of a guitar player and accomplished musician he is. When he's speaking to you and giving you direction,
like, what does he say?
Well, it depends on the part, but he can actually tell you, like, play it up at this fret. You know, if he wants something very specific, he can communicate exactly what he wants. And maybe you run through it and maybe the tone isn't right. Like, he can tell you exactly what to change that'll hit the way he needs to hear it in the control room. Because things are a little different in the headphones than they are in there. And Dan's got a vision for what this is going to sound like 8 steps later in final mix, right, and all this. So he's like, hey, thin that out a little bit. You know, I know it's going to sound like more thin than it should be right now, but I'm making room for other things later, you know. And I mean, just getting that mindset of like thinking further down the road than just what's happening now, and making sure that what you're doing now is going to work later. And he'll come out on the floor and just say, "Can I grab one of your guitars?" "Yes, of course. Show me exactly what you're talking about." And he'll do that sometimes, but most of the time we've worked together enough now where he kind of just wants you to do what you think first, and then we shape from there. So it's, it's gotten to be more of a, I don't know, a comfortable thing, probably.
When he picks up your guitar, or if he's like, "Hey, let me pick up one of these and just show you what I mean," is that kind of a funny, like I don't know what that's like. Like, is that weird that it's like I don't know.
No, sometimes that's the best way to communicate. I mean, all kinds of producers are good players, and if they are, and that's how it's easier for them to just show you what they're looking for, even if they can't fully execute it. Like if it's not a Dan
Just
Huff,
something, yeah,
just something like that. It's something like this that I'm thinking, and you see where their hands go. You go, like, okay, now I got exactly what you can't communicate with words through the glass sometimes.
Right.
But one time I do remember we were working one day, and he was like, he picked up one of my guitars, and he wasn't thinking about the fact that we had all tuned down for this song, and now I'm playing it out of he's like, "Show me what position you're playing this out of again." And I showed him, and the guitar was tuned down, and he was like, or something about it where he was like, "You got a capo?" And I handed him like this sort of newfangled capo. And I was like, "Here, do you know how to use this?" And he was like, "You don't think I know how to use a capo?" He was messing with me. I mean, we've gotten in this thing where we go back and forth and pick on each other.
I can picture him saying
it's
that
a lot of fun,
jokingly.
Yeah. I mean,
Quick note: if you want to check out some of the licks that Rob is playing in this interview, you can get all of that plus a bunch of other great guitar lessons on my Patreon. Everything's tabbed out. Check it out. Link in the pinned comment. All right, back to the interview.
So when you first moved to town, I think one of the first gigs you had was going out with Winona.
Yeah.
And Tom Bukovac basically got you that gig.
Yeah.
But you say you feel like you weren't quite ready for that gig. Or you were a little green, I guess.
Oh, I was definitely green, and it was more to do with the music I was into at the time. I came to town, kind of like trying to find my way into a lot of more Americana circles, blues circle. There was more outskirts music going on than just country at the time. And then I met Tom, and we've been friends for a long time now. But yeah, he was leaving that gig, and I knew he was leaving that gig because I used to hang out with him all the time, and he would talk about it. I think I'm ready to jump into sessions, and I think we would talk about that kind of stuff a lot. And yeah, I mean, I just think that there were a lot of circumstances on the gig. Like it was when the Line 6 pod first came out. I'd never played through a direct rig in my life. I was an
Isn't
amp
it funny
guy.
how I remember having a pod and thinking, "Oh, this sounds so good."
Some of it did, yeah.
But now you look back and it's like that was so premature, or that was so early, that technology.
Oh yeah, and I mean it was just tough. It was just that learning curve of playing through a direct rig. It just didn't sound the way an amp sounds behind, and it wasn't necessarily the style of music that I had the right instincts for at the time, but they offered me the gig. I was so shocked. I didn't think they'd really offer it to me. I knew other people that were auditioning that were way more suited for it, but yeah, I did that for about 6 months,